As the caravan you and your adventuring party were hired to defend is but a few short kilometers away from the caravanserai, you are met by the sight of the tall, imposing walls surrounding a very small oasis that serves as shelter for travelers. Your gaze is drawn instinctively to the colorful attire of the Imperial Guards stationed at the entrance of the caravanserai. They are stationed here to defend the merchants, the travelers, the oasis itself, and to make sure that taxes are paid in full. You find your way inside the courtyard and stable your animals, unburdening them. You find a few empty rooms and set up several mattresses in preparation for tonight's rest. You start rummaging through your possessions and open a few of the crates that the caravan is transporting. You fish out some of the more expensive goods. You already have a route set in mind for this oasis. You've been here many times with other caravans. You know the people here and you know what to trade in order to obtain what you're truly after. You fish out a few nutmegs, some saffron strands, you fish out a few chunks of amber and start walking among the merchants. You give a few nuggets of gold for some coffee. You exchange some goat meat for some honey. You exchange some tallow for some candles. And finally, you locate the individual you are looking for, a dark-skinned elf. They are sitting beside a small fire. They acknowledge your presence, smile, and invite you to take a seat next to them. You hand over the coffee and they start grinding it, pulling out of the fire a pot of boiling water. Nuggets of gold, the amber, the saffron, and some nutmeg exchange hands, and in return, you are offered some godly desserts. Baklavas, meant for the imperial court. You don't know where this individual obtained such a delight, nor do you care. They pour a cup of freshly brewed coffee, and its bitterness counters the sweetness of the baklava. It is bliss. You are savoring every bite and every sip. You take it all in, and you let out a sigh of relief. It is well earned. And you again take it in, as you know it is a counterbalance to what awaits tomorrow, when the guards will surely rob you blind, and when you will have to step out into the scorching desert once again. Tonight, it is bliss. Welcome to today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to Funky Monkey MP, the place where you get your weekly dose of miniature painting, history and world building. On today's episode we'll be talking about food in the Ottoman Empire in the Middle Ages. Before we start, let's talk about the miniature. This is Pocus, the bob-tailed barbarian from Animal Adventures Tales of Cats and Catacombs, and, unfortunately, for now, the last cat miniature that we will be painting. For now. But we're gonna have a lot of fun with this little mini. With that out of the way, let us begin. First, let's set the scene. It would be very difficult and frankly insanely boring to start listing every single dish that one might find while traveling through the Middle Ages, through the Ottoman Empire. This is especially because the Ottoman Empire is one of the largest and longest lasting empires in European history and in Middle Eastern history. And, if I'm not mistaken, even in African history. At its high point, the Ottoman Empire stretched from modern-day Algeria, controlled parts of the Arab Peninsula, it touched the shores of the Persian Gulf, it controlled Baghdad, it stretched to the coasts of the Caspian Sea, while in Europe it controlled the Balkans, it conquered parts of Hungary, and it stretched as far as the outskirts of Vienna while it lay siege to the city. When it comes to other parts of the world, the Ottoman Empire had vassals in the Philippines. Again, I'm digressing. You know the drill, another story for another time. That being said, you might have figured out that having such a large territory meant that different people of different backgrounds and religious backgrounds found their homes within the empire. As such, there were very important differences between what the Christian community ate as opposed to the Muslim and the Jewish community. For one, pork. This also created a very interesting situation where a very tasty and very fragrant cuisine meant to satisfy everyone started to emerge. This melting pot of cultures and backgrounds created the perfect conditions for the emergence of one of the tastiest, most fragrant and most interesting cuisines in the world. Now, let us talk about what the commoners ate. In my opinion, one of the most important methods of diffusing the Ottoman culture and its cuisine was through the creation of imarets. Imarets, and I hope I'm not butchering the name too much, were public kitchens sponsored by the Sublime Porte or the Imperial Gate, I'm gonna come back to these names, and served food for free to the population. This, in my opinion, had a twofold effect. First, it allowed the population to look more kindly towards the Ottoman rule as they received free food. And second, was a tool of easily and quickly spreading the culture, the cuisine, and the traditions of the Ottoman Empire throughout their territories. Now let's take a moment and talk about the name of the Ottoman Imperial Administration, the Sublime Porte or the Imperial Gate. You have to understand that before Constantinople was conquered by the Ottomans in 1453, all new laws and decrees were announced before the imperial gates that led to the imperial palace. Before these imperial gates, foreign envoys were also ceremoniously received. Once the city fell to the Ottomans, they didn't change this tradition. They continued announcing laws and decrees in front of the imperial gate and receiving envoys there. The French called the Ottoman administration the Sublime Porte, while the rest of Europe, of course in their own language, called this administration the Imperial Gate. Now, with that understood, whenever I say the Sublime Porte or the Imperial Gate, just think of the Ottoman Imperial Administration, or vice versa. Let us continue. Bread. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet. If you want more info on this, go check out my previous video right over there. In Anatolia, most of the territory of modern-day Turkey, in the 16th century, so the 1500s, there were over 30-something kinds of wheat bread being produced and sold and consumed. Anatolia is the birthplace of modern-day wheat. Over millennia, people cross-pollinated different kinds of wheat until we got modern-day wheat. They heavily relied on wheat, and when there was food scarcity or the crops failed, they relied on barley or rye, as did the rest of Europe. The Ottomans are also known for their pastries. As Europeans were known for pies, Ottomans were known for pastries, both savory and sweet. The difference is that most of the Ottoman pastries were eaten whole with the pastry itself, as opposed to the pies that the Europeans used to feed the animals. Bulgur, or cracked wheat. This was the staple food for the commoners. Rice was very expensive and rarely found among the commoners, but there were actually places where even common people could taste rice. These were the Ottoman hosteleries built along trade routes. These were called Hans, singular Han, and were places where travelers could rest for free and could get a meal. They would usually get either rice pilafs or rice soup, again for free through the kindness of the Ottoman administration. They also ate pulse such as mung beans, broad beans, chickpeas and lentils. Meat. When it comes to meat throughout the Ottoman Empire, people had access to veal, beef and goat meat. Although this didn't mean that people actually ate these animals that often, as they provide in the long run a lot of milk and as such a lot more food instead of a very large but limited quantity of meat. Christians, on the other hand, also heavily relied on pork, in contrast to Muslims and Jews who cannot eat the meat of pigs. All of the population within the Ottoman Empire consumed large quantities of fish and seafood, and especially Christians took advantage of these products during Lent. I've mentioned milk and dairy products. Products ranging from butter to clarified butter, also known as ghee, to kefir, to cheese, and everything in between had a very, very important role in the Ottoman diet. Besides all of this, the Ottoman Empire had the advantage of being in the heart of the old world. They had access to spices from Europe, from Africa, locally found within the Middle East, and from Asia. This is a staple of the Ottoman medieval cuisine and has endured to this day in the Middle Eastern cuisine. And with that, let's take a look at the miniature, see how it's coming along before we move on to the elites. With a mix of Abaddon Black and Administratum Grey, I am adding highlights to the black stripes on Pakas's garment. Now, with some white scar, I am touching up some areas that I have missed or messed up. Going back to Abaddon Black, I am painting the fur pieces on Pakas's bracers, trying very hard not to cover the skulls that adorn his attire. Let us continue. You might have noticed that we are skipping the middle class altogether. This is because I couldn't find any accurate and reliable and detailed sources about what the middle class in the Ottoman Empire consumed. If we are to look at what the European middle class in general ate, we could extrapolate and presume that people ate whatever the commoners ate, but in greater quantity and of greater quality. We can't tell for sure, and as such, I'm not gonna just try to guess what they ate. As such, we're gonna skip to the elites, where there are a little bit more detailed sources, although even there are some issues. Let me explain. At any given time, the administrative body of the Ottoman Empire numbered around 4,000 people. These 4,000 people, more or less, were, by the grace of the Sultan, fed for free daily. This means there was a small army of chefs, cooks, sous chefs, apprentices, and so on and so forth that had to cook and serve food for 4,000 people per day. There was a head chef for pastries, there was a head chef for meats, there was a head chef for desserts, and so on and so forth. These people didn't want to share their recipes as to not be overtaken by their competition. The recipes taken, improved, and be replaced. As such, the recipes were very closely guarded secrets. This means we have a hard time trying to piece together what people of higher rank ate in the medieval times in the Ottoman Empire, but it's not impossible. Let's start detailing. First, bread. As it happens in Europe, the whiter the bread, the wealthier you were. Bread was baked using different quality ingredients depending on the status of the individual who was eating it. So the Sultan ate a very highly processed, very white flour bread, while the lowest ranking official ate somewhat brownish bread. That being said, when it comes to meat, lamb and mutton were reserved for the elites. Of course, commoners could have access to such meats, but they were very expensive and usually exclusively consumed by the elites. When it comes to vegetables, they ate anything and everything. When it comes to fruit, they had access to anything and everything. But the interesting part is that at the end of the 15th century, there was a special department created for supervising the imports and exports and the supply of the imperial kitchen. Of course, mostly imports because they didn't export that much. There were also imperial tasters that made sure that the food served to the imperial court was not poisoned. There was a separate kitchen that served the Sultan and his household exclusively. There was a whole kitchen that served the harem. There was a whole kitchen that served the nobility. There was a separate kitchen that also served the slave soldiers of the imperial court. During special ceremonies, up to 5,000 or more than 5,000 people would be served daily for free. Again, a small army of cooks, chefs, apprentices, prep cooks, and everything in between. The vassal states would also send different food products destined for the imperial court. And of course, tribute would also be paid in the form of spices, which were very coveted. The imperial court would also consume large quantities of fowl, ranging from quail to partridge to snipe to Egyptian chickens. Egyptian chickens are the Ottoman name for Turkey. Turkey was brought over from the Americas in the 16th and 17th century, and they called it Egyptian chickens. They would also eat a lot of offal, so the organs, the inner parts, and the head of sheep, which were delicacies in the imperial court. And rice. They had access to a lot of rice. But enough about this. Let us talk about the topic we are all actually here for. Desserts and sweets. But before we do so, let's take a peek at the miniature, see how it's coming along. Surprising for me, I am now using lead belcher to touch up Pocus's battle axe, as I managed to mess it up a little bit while painting the gems encrusted in the body of the battle axe. I am now adding a nice coat of Nuln Oil in preparation of the highlights, and thus creating more shadows, deepening the details, and bringing out the emerald color used for the gems encrusted in the weapon. I am also using Nuln Oil on the handle of the axe, and once it is dry, I'll go back to lead belcher to touch up the details once again. Desserts. Fancy desserts were reserved for the elite, although commoners also had access to some desserts. Most of them were sweetened with honey or later on with sugar, and as an alternative with treacle of grapes. They were also very flavorful. In making desserts, people would use saffron, mastic, cardamom, cumin, ginger, cloves, black pepper, and everything in between to bring that flavor out. They also went as far as using rose water, orange blossom water, and verjuice. Verjuice is the juice of unripened grapes. Apparently it is quite delicious. Now let's talk about desserts. First and foremost, I think one of the staples of Middle Eastern cuisine, baklava. Baklava has its origin in the 15th century when the Sultan would present baklavas to his Janissary troops on Ramadan during a ceremony called Baklava alay. Then we have halva. Halva is a paste made with flour, sweetened with honey or sugar later on, and with crushed toasted sesame seeds or toasted sunflower seeds made into a paste. This is a dessert that can be kept at room temperature as it doesn't easily spoil. Its origin is apparently around the 7th century CE and made its way to the Western European courts around the 18th, 19th century. Then we have kataifi. Kataifi is a pastry soaked in a sugar or honey syrup topped with clotted cheese or with pistachio or crushed nuts. Quite delicious. Its origin is around the 13th century, although it is not certain. Then we have Gullac. Hope I'm not butchering this name, although if I am butchering it, please forgive me. This is a very special dessert made with a special kind of pastry, milk, pomegranates, and some crushed nuts or pistachio between the layers of dough. We also have Turkish Delight, which is a starch-based gel, and in the more expensive variety you have this gel with pistachio or walnuts or hazelnuts, while the more traditional varieties are scented and flavored with rose water, with orange blossom water, with mint, or with mastic. And they also had a lot of desserts in the form of drinks. Citron sherbets were brought from Egypt. Rhubarb sherbets were brought from Damascus. And the more common found varieties were those scented with flowers such as rose, lily, lilac, narcissus, violets, and even with ambergris. Ambergris is a dull, grey, waxy substance created in the digestive systems of sperm whales that is very sought after, especially by perfumers, as when used, it prolongs the life of a perfume. So it is quite interesting. And one other thing that the elites had access to were ice and snow brought from the province of Bursa and kept in the snow and ice deposits of Istanbul, used to cool the drinks of the elite. And with that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we've reached the end of our little adventure through the culinary history of the Ottoman Empire during the Middle Ages. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And with that, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I truly hope you got some inspiration today, or at least learned something new, and I'll see you all here next week on Funky Monkey MP. Have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Cheers!